Waitress is fired for helping a homeless man, then bikers appear and do the unimaginable. Emily Miller always believed that being kind was free. She lived by that rule every single day of her life, even when it meant giving away her last dollar or sharing her lunch with a stranger. But on that rainy Tuesday afternoon, her kindness would cost her more than she ever expected. The day had started like any other at Joe's Diner, where Emily had worked for the past 3 years. She tied her auburn hair back, put on her name tag, and prepared for another 12-hour shift. The regular customers loved her. She remembered their orders, their stories, and always had a genuine smile ready, even on the toughest days. But today was different. Through the streaked windows of the diner, Emily kept noticing an elderly man sitting on the bench outside. He had been there for hours, his military veteran's cap pulled low over his eyes, his thin jacket doing little to protect him from the cold rain. Every time she looked at him, her heart squeezed a little tighter. "Stop staring at that homeless man," Carla Matthews, the diner's manager, snapped as she walked past Emily. "You'll scare away the paying customers." Emily bit her lip, holding back the words she wanted to say. Carla had taken over the diner 6 months ago, and since then, everything had changed. The warm, family atmosphere had been replaced by strict rules and an obsession with profit. Even the portions had gotten smaller, while the prices kept going up. As the afternoon crowd thinned out, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the man outside. She had seen him checking his pockets earlier, probably counting loose change. The way his hands shook, not from the cold, but with a familiar tremor she recognized from her late grandfather, also a veteran, made her chest ache. "Table 6 needs their check," Carla barked, making Emily jump. "And don't even think about feeding that vagrant. This isn't a charity, Emily. We're running a business here." Emily nodded automatically, but her mind was already made up. During her break, she quietly prepared a hot turkey sandwich with extra gravy, the day's special. She added a large portion of mashed potatoes and some fresh green beans on the side. It would cost her nearly all of her morning tips, but she didn't care. Hiding the plate under her apron, Emily slipped outside. The man looked up as she approached, revealing deep blue eyes that carried years of pain and wisdom. "Hi there," Emily said softly, setting the plate down beside him. "I thought you might like something warm to eat." The man stared at the food, then at Emily, his eyes filling with tears. I can't pay for this, miss. I'm Emily." She smiled, settling onto the bench beside him. "And please, it's my treat. Would you like to tell me your name?" "David," he replied after a moment, his voice rough with emotion. "David Thompson." "I haven't. It's been a while since anyone." He couldn't finish the sentence, but Emily understood. As David ate, taking small, careful bites as if to make the meal last as long as possible, he began to talk. He told her about his service in Desert Storm, about the nightmares that followed him home, about the PTSD that slowly unraveled his life like a loose thread pulling apart a sweater. "The hardest part," David said, wiping his mouth with the napkin Emily had brought, "isn't the hunger or the cold. It's feeling invisible. People look right through you, like you're not even human anymore." Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. "I see you, David. And thank you for your service." She didn't notice Carla watching through the window until it was too late. When Emily walked back into the diner, the atmosphere had changed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward her. "Theft!" Carla's voice cut through the silence like a knife. She stood behind the counter, her face red with anger, holding up the security camera's tablet. "Taking food without paying, that's stealing from my business." Emily felt her face burn. "I paid for it with my tips dash." "Don't lie to me," Carla interrupted, her voice getting louder with each word. "I saw you sneaking that food out. Did you think the cameras wouldn't catch you? Did you think you could just give away my food to any bum who sits outside?" The customers watched in uncomfortable silence as Carla continued her tirade. Some looked away, embarrassed by the scene. Others recorded it on their phones. "He's not a bum," Emily protested, her voice shaking but determined. He's a veteran who served our country. I don't care, Carla shouted. You stole from me, and you're fired. Hand over your apron. And don't expect your tips from today either. Consider that payment for the food you stole. Emily's hands trembled as she untied her apron. 3 years of service, hundreds of happy customers, countless extra hours worked without complaint, all erased in an instant because she tried to help someone in need. As she gathered her belongings from her locker, Emily could hear Carla already calling the temp agency for a replacement. The other waitresses kept their heads down, afraid to meet her eyes. Only old Mrs. Johnson, who had been coming to the diner for breakfast every day for the past decade, stood up and walked out, leaving her half-finished meal and a disgusted look behind. Outside, David was gone, but he had left a note scribbled on the napkin. Thank you for seeing me. Your kindness means more than you know. D. Emily clutched the note as she walked to her car, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what hurt worse, losing her job, being humiliated in front of everyone, or knowing that tomorrow, David would still be hungry, and she wouldn't be able to help him. What Emily didn't know was that her simple act of kindness, and Carla's cruel response, had set in motion a chain of events that would change not just her life, but the entire community. Sometimes, the biggest waves start with the smallest ripples, and Emily's act of compassion was about to create a tsunami. She drove home in the rain, the day's events playing over and over in her mind. Carla Matthews sat in her office that evening, fuming as she reviewed the security footage. She had always prided herself on running a tight ship, and Emily's defiance felt like a personal insult. With a few clicks, she uploaded the video to the diner's social media page, adding a caption that made her smile with satisfaction. Watch this entitled employee steal food from a small business. This is what's wrong with today's workforce. They think they can give away whatever they want without consequences. Good riddance to bad employees. #business owner life #no freebies. The post went live at 8:47 p.m. By midnight, it had over 10,000 views. But the response wasn't what Carla expected. While some business owners supported her stance, the majority of comments painted a very different picture. Did this manager really fire someone for feeding a veteran? Shame on you. Imagine being proud of having no heart. Won't be eating here again. That waitress deserves a medal, not a pink slip. Among those watching the video that night was Jake Thompson, leader of the Steel Angels Motorcycle Club. He sat in his garage, smartphone in one hand, beer forgotten in the other, as he replayed the footage for the 5th time. Each viewing made his hands shake more. The homeless man in the video, the way he held himself, the slight tilt of his head when he spoke, even the familiar gesture of wiping his mouth with the napkin. Jake would know those mannerisms anywhere. He had grown up watching them across the dinner table, before the war changed everything. Boss? His right-hand man, Mike, called from the doorway. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jake looked up, his face pale. That's my dad, Mike. The homeless vet in the video, that's my father. The last time Jake had seen David Thompson, he was 15 years old, watching his father pack a small bag and walk out the door. The PTSD had become too much, David had said. He was protecting them by leaving. Jake's mother had cried for weeks. Jake had sworn he'd never forgive him. Now, 15 years later, here was his father, being served a meal by a kind waitress who lost her job for showing him basic human dignity. Jake's phone buzzed with messages from other club members who had recognized David. The Steel Angels weren't just any motorcycle club, they were known for their veteran support programs and community service. Many of them were veterans themselves. She did for my father what I should have been doing, Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. While I've been angry all these years, that waitress showed him kindness without even knowing who he was. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her small apartment, watching her own public shaming unfold. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications as more people shared the video. Friends sent screenshots of Carla's post, expressing outrage. Former customers reached out with support. But Emily felt numb. She had tried calling several restaurants for work, but in their small town, word traveled fast. No one wanted to risk hiring someone labeled as a thief, no matter the circumstances. Just give it time, her sister Sarah advised over the phone. People will see through Carla's lies. But Emily wasn't sure she had time. Her rent was due in 2 weeks, and her savings wouldn't cover it. The irony wasn't lost on her. One act of kindness to help someone in need might leave her struggling to meet her own needs. What Emily didn't know was that across town, Jake Thompson was gathering his motorcycle club for an emergency meeting. The Steel Angels sat in their clubhouse, watching the video one more time, their expressions growing darker with each viewing. "This ain't just about the waitress anymore," Jake told his brothers. "This is about my father, about every veteran who's been forgotten, about every person who's been punished for doing the right thing." The bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They had built their reputation on helping veterans and standing up against injustice. Now they had a chance to do both. "Tomorrow," Jake announced, his voice firm with resolve, "we're going to pay Carla's diner a visit. And we're going to show her exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." As the bikers planned their response, Carla's video continued to spread, but her attempt to shame Emily was backfiring spectacularly. Local news stations were picking up the story. Veterans groups were sharing it with calls for boycotts. Former employees were starting to speak out about their own experiences under Carla's management. The small-town drama was about to become something much bigger, and nobody, not Emily, not Carla, and not even Jake, was prepared for what would happen next. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the first motorcycles appeared. They came in waves, dozens of chrome-clad machines thundering down Main Street, their riders dressed in leather vests bearing the Steel Angels patch. By 7 a.m., the entire parking lot of Carla's diner was filled with motorcycles. Inside, Carla was berating her new waitress about the proper way to fold napkins when the rumbling started. She looked up to see Jake Thompson pushing through the door, followed by 20 of his largest club members. The breakfast crowd fell silent. "We need to talk," Jake said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of controlled anger. "About David Thompson." Carla lifted her chin defiantly. "This is private property. I don't need to talk to anyone, especially not about some homeless dash." "My father," Jake cut her off, stepping closer. "The veteran you chased away? The man that kind waitress helped? He's my father." The color drained from Carla's face. Everyone in town knew the Steel Angels. Their charity rides had raised thousands for veteran causes. Their youth mentorship program had turned around dozens of troubled teens. And Jake Thompson's word carried more weight than any city council members. I didn't know," Carla stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. "No, you didn't," Jake agreed. "You didn't know he was my father. You didn't know he earned 2 Purple Hearts. You didn't know he saved 3 of his fellow soldiers in Desert Storm. You didn't bother to know anything before you decided he wasn't worth basic human dignity." Mike, Jake's right-hand man, stepped forward with a tablet. "But we've been doing some learning of our own, Carla. About you. About how you run this place." The bikers had been busy. After the video went viral, former employees started reaching out to them. Each had a story to tell, and the Steel Angels had listened, documented, and investigated. 17 wage theft complaints in 6 months. Mike read from the tablet. Unauthorized deductions from employee paychecks. Forcing servers to work off the clock. Keeping portions of delivery drivers' tips. Should I continue? Other customers were starting to record the confrontation on their phones. Carla's face switched between red and white as Mike listed each violation. "That's all lies," she sputtered. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually," a new voice spoke up. Everyone turned to see Rachel, Carla's former bookkeeper, walking through the door. She held up a USB drive. "I can prove all of it. I kept copies of everything, every doctor time sheet, every manipulated payroll record. I quit last month because I couldn't stomach it anymore." The diner erupted in whispers. Several customers got up and left, leaving cash on their tables but their food untouched. "You want to talk about theft?" Jake's voice cut through the chaos. "Let's talk about how you've been stealing from your employees for months. The same hardworking people who keep this place running while you sit in your office making videos about entitled workers. Carla's phone started buzzing. The local news had gotten wind of the confrontation, and reporters were already gathering outside. Through the windows, she could see more motorcycles arriving, along with dozens of regular citizens holding signs. "Support our veterans," and "Justice for Emily." "This isn't just about Emily anymore," Jake continued. "Though what you did to her was despicable enough. This is about every person you've exploited. Every veteran you've disrespected. Every employee you've cheated." One of the younger bikers raised his hand. "I've already uploaded Rachel's documents to the Department of Labor's website. Filed a formal complaint too. They seemed very interested." Carla gripped the counter, her knuckles white. "You're trying to ruin me." "No," Jake corrected her. "You did that yourself. We're just shining a light on it. And we're not done yet." He turned to address the customers still in the diner. "My father spent years fighting for this country. When he came home broken, this country turned its back on him. But yesterday, one person showed him kindness. And she was punished for it. Well, not anymore." The bikers began distributing flyers. Printing jobs would never be a problem, with Big Pete's print shop being a proud Steel Angels sponsor. The flyers detailed every violation they'd uncovered, along with contact information for the labor board and links to employee rights resources. "We're organizing a town hall meeting tonight," Jake announced. "Anyone who's ever worked here, anyone who's witnessed misconduct, we want to hear your story. And we've invited Channel 5 News to cover it." Carla's phone buzzed again, her business partner calling. The local news website had already picked up the story. "Viral video leads to labor investigation. Local diner under fire." Outside, the crowd was growing. The Steel Angels had put out the call, and other motorcycle clubs were responding. Veterans groups were arriving. Former employees were showing up with their families. The parking lot had become a rally point for everyone who'd ever felt powerless against corporate greed. Jake looked at Carla one last time. "You had a choice yesterday. You could have shown compassion. You could have recognized the humanity in both Emily and my father. Instead, you chose cruelty. Now you get to live with the consequences." As if on cue, a health inspector walked in, followed by 2 officers from the Labor Standards Division. They'd received multiple complaints, and were there for an immediate audit. The Steel Angels filed out, their job done for now. But this was just the beginning. They had started something that would ripple through the entire community, challenging everyone to question what truly mattered: profits or people, rules or compassion, turning a blind eye or taking a stand. And somewhere across town, Emily's phone was ringing. The local news wanted her side of the story, and the Steel Angels had a proposition for her. One that would change her life forever. Emily sat in her small living room, staring at her phone in disbelief. In the past 24 hours, her GoFundMe page set up by the Steel Angels without her knowledge had raised over $50,000. The description was simple. "Help Emily serve kindness to those in need." "I can't accept this," she told Jake, who had come to visit with several other club members. "It's too much." Jake leaned forward in his chair, his usual tough demeanor softened by sincerity. "This isn't charity, Emily. This is investment in someone who proved they have the right heart. And we have a proposition for you." He laid out their plan. The Steel Angels wanted to help Emily start her own food truck. But not just any food truck, one with a mission to serve both paying customers and those in need. They had already secured permits, found a suitable truck, and lined up suppliers who were willing to work with them. "The community needs more people like you," Jake explained. "Someone who sees people as people, not problems. But first, there's someone who wants to thank you personally." The door opened, and David Thompson walked in. He was freshly showered, wearing clean clothes provided by the Veterans Support Center. His eyes were clearer now, though still carrying the weight of years of struggle. Emily stood up instinctively. "David! Are you okay?" "I've been worried, Dash." "I'm better than okay," David said, his voice trembling slightly. "Thanks to you." What followed was a conversation that moved everyone in the room. David shared his full story, not just of his military service, but of the darkness that followed. The PTSD that made him feel like a stranger in his own home. The choice to leave his family rather than let them watch him fall apart. The years of wandering, trying to outrun memories that always caught up. Jake listened, tears streaming openly down his face. When David finished, Jake crossed the room in 2 strides and embraced his father. "I was so angry at you," Jake whispered. "For so long. But I understand now. And I'm sorry I didn't look harder, sorry I didn't try to understand sooner." Emily watched father and son reunite, feeling both touched and slightly uncomfortable, as if she was intruding on a private moment. But then David turned to her. "You did more than feed me that day," he said. "Your kindness, it reminded me that I was still human, still worthy of basic dignity. It gave me the courage to finally reach out for help. And somehow, it brought my son back to me." The Steel Angels support rally had turned into something much bigger. Local businesses began calling, offering to sponsor Emily's food truck venture. A restaurant supply company donated equipment. A local artist volunteered to design the truck's logo. But Emily still felt conflicted. "It feels wrong," she confided to Sarah that evening. "People losing their jobs at the diner, all this attention, just because I did what anyone should do." "But that's exactly why this matters," Sarah replied. "You did what people should do, even when it cost you everything. That's why everyone's responding. You reminded them of who they want to be." The town hall meeting that night was packed. Former employees shared stories of Carla's exploitation. Veterans spoke about the stigma they faced. Community members discussed how to better serve their vulnerable populations. Emily's story had become a catalyst for change. The local council proposed new worker protection measures. The Veterans Support Center received record donations. Other businesses started implementing pay it forward programs for those in need. Jake and David spent hours talking, beginning the long, difficult process of healing their relationship. David agreed to enter a treatment program for PTSD, and Jake promised to be there every step of the way. "I kept thinking I had to be strong by myself," David admitted during one of their conversations. "But real strength is being willing to accept help. Emily taught me that." The food truck plan evolved into something bigger than Emily had imagined. Local farmers offered to provide fresh produce at reduced prices. A coffee company wanted to create a special Veterans Blend, with proceeds going to support homeless veterans. Schools asked about incorporating community service programs. But what touched Emily most were the small moments. A young veteran who came to thank her for showing him that people still cared. An elderly woman who handed her a $100 bill and asked her to keep the kindness going. A group of teenagers who volunteered to help with the food truck's social media. One evening, as Emily sat with Jake and David going over plans for the truck's launch, she found herself overwhelmed by how much had changed in just a few days. "I'm still not sure I deserve all this," she admitted. "Maybe it's not about deserving," David said quietly. "Maybe it's about seeing an opportunity to make things right. You saw me when I was invisible. Jake and his friends saw a chance to help their community. And now everyone's seeing how small acts of kindness can change lives." The Steel Angels had organized another charity ride for the weekend, this time to raise awareness for veteran homelessness. Hundreds of bikes were expected to participate, with all proceeds going to support Emily's food truck mission. As Emily watched Jake and David work together on ride preparations, she realized that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. Her decision to share a meal with a hungry veteran had sparked a movement of compassion that was still growing. And this was just the beginning. Carla Matthews sat alone in her office, staring at the mounting pile of papers on her desk. The past week had been a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The health inspector's report highlighted 17 violations. The Department of Labor's preliminary findings suggested she might owe over $100,000 in back wages. Her business partner had stopped taking her calls. Outside, the once busy parking lot was nearly empty. A few loyal customers still came, but most tables sat vacant, collecting dust. The local paper's investigative report had been devastating. Diner disaster, a pattern of employee exploitation exposed. The article detailed everything: the wage theft, the tip skimming, the forced off-clock work. Former employees had come forward in droves, each with their own story of mistreatment. But what hurt Carla's business most were the personal accounts. "She made me work through my daughter's graduation," one former waitress revealed. "Said if I left, I shouldn't bother coming back." The breakfast rush, once the diner's busiest time, had dwindled to nothing. The regulars who'd been coming for years found other places to eat. Even the morning coffee club, a group of retirees who'd gathered at the diner for decades, had relocated to the cafe down the street. Carla's phone buzzed another negative review on Yelp. She'd stopped reading them days ago, but couldn't help herself this time. "Used to love this place, but can't support a business that treats people this way." The owner showed her true colors when she fired Emily for helping a veteran. Karma's real. The mention of Emily made Carla's blood boil. In her mind, this was all Emily's fault. If she had just followed the rules, none of this would have happened. But deep down, in moments of quiet honesty, Carla knew better. Emily had simply been the catalyst that exposed what had been wrong all along. Her suppliers were starting to demand payment up front. 3 more servers had quit that morning, tired of dealing with angry customers and empty sections. The few who remained were documenting everything, knowing the labor department's investigation was ongoing. "Ms. Matthews?" Her new manager, the 4th this week, knocked on the door. "The reporters are back. They want to comment about the class action lawsuit." The lawsuit had been filed yesterday. Every employee from the past 3 years was eligible to join. The law firm handling the case had set up a website specifically for former workers to submit their claims. Meanwhile, across town, Emily's story had inspired other businesses to change their practices. The local grocery store started a suspended grocery program, where customers could prepay for basic items that would be given to those in need. The pharmacy implemented a prescription assistance fund. Even the movie theater began hosting free monthly screenings for veterans and their families. Carla's phone rang again. Her landlord. The rent was late, and he'd heard rumors about the business failing. He wanted to know if she was planning to break the lease. The truth was, she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. Her personal savings were depleted from paying lawyer fees. The negative publicity had spread beyond their small town. A regional news station had picked up the story, and now tourists were avoiding the diner too. "Ms. Matthews?" The manager again. "The health inspector is back. They got another complaint about the refrigeration unit." Carla put her head in her hands. The repairs would cost thousands she didn't have. Equipment maintenance had been one of many corners she'd cut to maximize profits. Now those decisions were coming back to haunt her. The final blow came that afternoon. Her business partner finally called back, but not with the support she'd hoped for. "I'm invoking the dissolution clause," he said without preamble. "I've got buyers interested in the property. They're willing to take it as is, no questions asked about the equipment or permits. It's a fair offer, Carla. Better than bankruptcy." She wanted to argue, to fight back, to blame everyone else for her problems. But as she looked around at the empty diner, at the staff avoiding her eyes, at the community that had turned its back on her, Carla finally understood what she'd lost: not just the business, but trust, respect, and any chance of redemption. The buyers, it turned out, were a group of local business owners who had a different vision for the space. They planned to turn it into a community kitchen and job training center, focusing on helping veterans and others in need learn culinary skills. As Carla packed up her office that evening, she found an old photo from when she'd first bought the diner. She'd been smiling then, full of dreams about running a successful business. Somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that success wasn't just about money in the register. It was about the lives you touched, the community you built, the kindness you shared. Outside, the sun was setting on more than just another day. It was setting on an era of exploitation and indifference. But for others in the community, it was the dawn of something new, a reminder that when people stand together against injustice, real change is possible. And through it all, Emily's simple act of kindness continued to ripple outward, touching more lives than she could have imagined. 3 months later, a shiny food truck painted in warm colors stood in the center of town. Its side featured a beautiful mural of 2 hands sharing bread, with the words, "The Veteran Special, where every meal feeds 2 souls," written in elegant script. The lunch crowd had gathered early, forming a line that stretched around the block. Emily stood at the window, wearing a crisp new apron with her name embroidered on it. Behind her, David worked the grill while Jake organized the delivery orders. The father and son had found their rhythm working together, their relationship growing stronger with each passing day. "1 veteran special and 1 pay-it-forward meal," Emily called out, handing a steaming container to a businessman in a suit. He smiled, knowing his purchase would provide a free meal to someone in need later that day. The food truck had become more than just a business, it was a symbol of community transformation. Every morning, Emily and her team prepared extra meals for the local shelter. The Pay It Forward board displayed dozens of prepaid meals, available to anyone who needed them, no questions asked. "You've started something special here," David said during a quiet moment between orders. His PTSD therapy was going well, and working in the truck gave him purpose. "Yesterday, I served a veteran who reminded me of myself 6 months ago. When I told him my story, he broke down crying. Said he'd been too ashamed to ask for help." Jake, overhearing his father, squeezed his shoulder. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but they were healing together. The Steel Angels had even created a veteran outreach program, inspired by David's journey, connecting homeless veterans with resources and support. The old diner building had been transformed into Community Kitchen Academy, where veterans and struggling community members learned culinary skills. Emily taught there twice a week, sharing not just cooking techniques but also her business model of combining profit with purpose. "Emily!" Sarah called from outside. "Channel 5 is here for the follow-up story." The reporter who arrived wasn't interested in scandal this time. She wanted to cover the ripple effects of what the community now called the kindness revolution. How one act of compassion had sparked a movement that transformed their town. "We're seeing similar programs starting in neighboring cities," the reporter explained. "Your story inspired people to look at their own communities differently." Emily felt overwhelmed. She still saw herself as that waitress who'd simply done what was right. But the evidence of impact was undeniable. The local homeless shelter reported a 50% increase in community support. 3 other businesses had adopted similar Pay It Forward programs. The city council had even passed new worker protection laws dubbed Emily's Law by locals. As the lunch rush wound down, Emily noticed a familiar face in line: Carla. The former diner owner had changed in the past months. After losing her business, she'd gone through her own journey of reflection. Today, she worked at a non-profit helping small business owners implement ethical practices. "Hello, Emily," Carla said quietly when she reached the window. "1 veteran special, please. And I'd like to pay for 5 meals on the board." Their eyes met, and volumes passed unspoken between them. Emily nodded, a small smile crossing her face as she prepared the order. Sometimes, the hardest lessons taught the most important truths. The day ended as it always did, with the Steel Angels gathering for their evening meal. The bikers had become family, not just to Emily but to everyone involved with the food truck. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams for the future. "Next month, we're launching the mobile outreach program," Jake announced. "Taking meals and services directly to homeless camps. 5 other motorcycle clubs want to help." Emily looked around at her unlikely family. David teaching a young veteran how to perfectly flip a burger, Jake discussing expansion plans with Sarah, bikers in leather vests carefully calculating how many pay-it-forward meals they could sponsor. "You know what I love most about this?" David said, catching Emily's eye. "Every meal we serve comes with a side of dignity. When people come here, whether they're paying or not, they're treated like they matter. Because they do." Emily remembered that rainy day when she'd snuck a meal to a homeless veteran, how she'd feared losing everything. Instead, she'd gained something priceless, the chance to prove that kindness wasn't just a nice idea, but a powerful force for change. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the food truck's cheerful paint, Emily updated the chalkboard menu for tomorrow. Below the daily specials, she wrote her favorite quote: "Kindness, the only investment that never fails." The story of the fired waitress, the homeless veteran, and the bikers who changed a town didn't end here. It lived on in every meal shared, every life touched, every moment of compassion that proved how a single act of kindness could transform an entire community. Because sometimes, the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, like sharing a sandwich with someone in need, or standing up for what's right, or choosing to see the humanity in every person who crosses your path. And in a world that often seems short on compassion, that might be the greatest special of all.